find some time to do this, I'm afraid, with Father's Day and also with the England game in the evening. There didn't really seem to be a good time to come online and do it, so I thought I'd do it now. For those who haven't listened to me do one of these before, I always like to start with a quote. This week's piece I titled, "Objects in the rear view mirror may appear closer than they are." And my point really in that title is that ultimately, at the moment, we've got lots of things that have gone on, and we know we've had a tough time as an economy and as a country over the last 18 months or so, but things really have started to improve, and a lot of the data is really giving us mixed signals apart from anything else. So rock fans and pop fans maybe will note that that's a Meatloaf song title. So the quote I went with this week was, "The skies were pure and the fields were green, and the sun was brighter than it's ever been." That is from Marvin Lee Day, also known as Meatloaf, from the song in this week's title. Might be a little bit over optimistic. I think there certainly have been better times, but it's certainly not a bad time for the UK economy as things stand at the moment, especially given everything that's gone on with the stimulus after COVID and everything else. So it's not to say there aren't challenges, there definitely are, but things look brighter than they have done for at least probably 21, 22 months, something like that, or maybe even a couple of years. So before I get started in earnest, I just wanted to mention it's last chance time for early bird bookings on the Property Business Workshop, Thursday the 4th of July in London. We're going to full price later this week. There's only a few tickets left anyway. This time Rod and I are taking on the fundamentals of property investment, which will include risk mitigation and control, relevant investment metrics, different secured debt arrangements and loan structures, and the biggie, scaling your property business or portfolio, why, when and how. This is Thursday the 4th of July in a central London location in Blackfriars. And let's face it, there's nothing else going on that day apart from a rout, realistically. I'd like to give one more thanks to the early bookers who make it viable for us to book a room and organise the event. They get 10% off. And there are tickets still available at bit.ly/PBWTHREE. So welcome to the supplement, everyone. This week's quote, the song title, as I say, reflects how I'm feeling about the markets at the moment, both in property and in economy. I did say Mr. Loaf is a little over the top with how bright maybe the future looks, but there are these two main challenges at the moment in attempting to be a worthwhile analyst. One is noise and mixed messages, which is obviously a relatively constant challenge, although I do try to highlight when the perfect storms are coming. The other is the timing of the data that comes out and the period that it was measuring, which bleeds further into making more noise and mixed messaging. So I'll give an example. I had a really fascinating conversation that was really probably briefer than I would like with a very informed and clearly accomplished developer last week when I went to present at James Adams' Developers Network meeting down in Bristol. We continued the conversation online via LinkedIn, and he supported his position, which was the crash is coming, the 18-year property cycle is a real thing. Any regulars or people who've heard me talk about it before, there is another YouTube video on my channel about the 18-year cycle. The spoiler alert is I'm not a big believer in it at all, although obviously markets do move in cycles. But the chart that he sent me was nearly 2 years out of date to support his argument. I'd agree 2 years ago it looked like a bubble might be on the cards, but that was 2 years ago. And then cometh the hour, cometh the lettuce, and giganto inflation, and the real property price adjusted for inflation has had the stones kicked out of it, and the adjustment has been made, which leaves us with a runway to prosperity. The other point about said chart that was shared, it had a very cherry-picked start to it. Always beware where the data starts. When I get into heavy-duty primary research, I'm always trying to use either all of the data rather than starting where someone else tells me to. But either way, I'm always interested in informed conversations, especially from those who disagree with me. We all learn something, and that's ultimately the goal. So is there any chance of a property price crash in 2026? In short, I really don't think so. There'd absolutely and definitely need to be a bubble of real significance first. And the only catalyst for that would be a massive drop in interest rates, which wasn't on the back of a big economic problem. I don't know how that would occur, so I can't see it personally. The other way a crash could happen, of course, is the massive ramp up in interest rates in 2026. Again, it looks unlikely at this point in time for us to move up massively from here, or at least significantly. So on with the show. You know how it works by now. Real-time market data, macro, and then a deeper dive. And this week I want to look at the quarterly release of the FCA mortgage data and draw together some of the points that I've just made. So Chris Watkin delivers, as always, in his UK property market stats show. Remember, this goes back to last Sunday, but that's as real time as you're going to get by a mile in this game. So last Sunday, we were 9 days into a month and only had 5 working days, or maybe 6 in agency terms, or 7 if you count the Saturdays. The tail of the tape. June prices agreed thus far are 6.34% higher per square foot than January. Number of listings is still very high, 8% higher year to date than 17, 18, 19, which is that pre-COVID bellwether. Net sales 6% higher than the 7-year average, which contains some great and some shaky markets. Muzdog has just commented saying, forget this, I'm leaving England. Dear oh dear. There are some snippets of deeper analysis that are worth reading as well, and I've replicated them here with credit to Chris again. Average asking price for this week's listings versus average asking price of the properties that were sale agreed this week. 22.5% difference. And of course, the average asking price is the higher one. The long-term average is between 16 and 17%. Overvaluing in the whole of the UK, higher valuing properties for sale, downsize, and a lower propensity of London and South East properties to sell are causing this, according to Chris. That one's interesting. The gap was only 12.5% in 2022, as I discussed. And obviously that was quite a hot market, certainly in the first part of it. So it is a massive departure from there. Alongside this, 1 in every 6.21 properties being reduced each month. Well, that long-term average is 1 in 10, so lots of reductions going on, all part of the rich pattern of the market having plenty of stock. And the sale fall-through rate, slight dip from last week's good news, to figures last seen in the last few months. 22.5% fall-through week for last week. Comparison 21.82 for the last 3 months. Long-term 8-year average 24.8. Q4 2022, it was over 40% after that budget. Not much to add to that, but do keep that figure in mind. Generally 1 in 4 deals falling through in the long-term average figures. And then one more. House prices for June month to date are £352 a square foot. That's a record. May 24, 348. April 24, 344. March 24, 339. Same as Feb. And Jan 24, 331. So a pretty steady progression upwards. That's 6.34% higher than in Jan. Why look at pounds per square foot? Well, there's a correlation of 92% between the change in pounds per square foot sale agreed and the land reg 5 months later. So by following the pounds per square foot figures, we know what will happen to the land reg 5 or 6 months in advance. The correlation coefficient, bear in mind for lay people, measures how strongly 2 variables are related, and that 0.92 or 92% indicates a very, very strong positive relationship. As one variable increases, the other also increases significantly. It's very close. The maximum value this can be is 1 or 100%, so 92 suggests a nearly perfect linear relationship. Now, I'd say read that one again, listen to that one again. 92% is very, very, very strong indeed. An analyst stream. We do need to be cautious because June on these figures was only 9 days old, but this isn't congruent at all with the RICS house price balance, which I'll discuss later. I expect this figure will calm down during June, but this week shows no signs of being election affected at all in the sales figures. So thanks as always for Chris for doing what he's doing. The best real-time stats in the game. As always, I salute you, Mr. Watkin. So into the macro. In a way, it was a difficult week to choose the top 4, but in a way very easy. You know that the 5-year gilts and swaps choose themselves. The labour market has to have a once-over in the week where unemployment figures are released. The growth report we can't omit, and as already discussed, the RICS house price balance ruffled a few feathers, so that gets some airtime too. So onto the ONS labour market report. We always hear about the unemployment figure, we know that. The inactivity has also started to get more airtime. The thing that amused me this week is that 100% of the media seem too scared to suggest that the largest minimum rise wage ever might lead to some jobs being shed. It's pretty basic economics, folks. It might be politically difficult, but this isn't a broadcast against the minimum wage or any kind of ideological position. It's just accepting a fact. If the minimum wage went to £1,000 an hour, only 0.1% of people would be left working. So rises cost jobs when that number is in the market, above the floor, as the economists would say. Of course, with lots of genuine other cost pressures, it's just a straw breaking a camel's back. Good for those who've kept their jobs, which is of course the vast majority. Sad for those who have to rely on benefits while seeking new employment. Overall, we should be interested in whether the government is better off or not on the back of it, although that's hard to measure because it depends on so many variables, including how long-term or not that resultant unemployment might be. What were the big figures though? Unemployment of 4.4, a tick above the consensus which thought it would remain the same at 4.3. 140,000 jobs lost. Wages still up 6%. I still prefer wages excluding bonus rather than including, although the COVID bonuses should really have washed out by now. 50,000 more claimants. Now that's a May figure rather than an April figure. The rest of the figures are from April, so let's be cautious. Last month's real-time estimate was that 85,000 lost their jobs, and it ended up being 140,000. This month the estimate was 3,000 job losses. So it looks like the trend has been snapped off, and the PMI data for May would support that as well, as they were very, very positive about employment. Over the past few months, about 50,000 more jobs have been found in between the real-time estimate and the following month. So if that continues, May will have been a positive month when we get those figures next month. The breakdown, which is more informative, is 74.3% employed, 4.4% unemployed, and 22.3% economically inactive. Remember, this is 16 to 64s. We also have employment down 1.9% since the pandemic, which is 0.3% into unemployment being higher and 1.7% more into economic activity. And no, that doesn't add up, but that's due to rounding and also due to the fact that if you're 65 and above and seeking a job but not employed, you are counted as unemployed, which doesn't help those figures add up either. It's a pain for a government. Of course, we've got to blame them to an extent. 2.83 million people of working age on NHS waiting lists. They're not all off work sick because of it, but that's a lot of people, of course. The pandemic has to take the majority of the blame, but blaming the doctors for taking industrial action is pretty unpalatable and hasn't gone down well in this election campaign. The true cost, aside from anything else, is difficult to measure, but also there seems no appetite to do it. You can go right to the other side of the argument. Online assessed benefits and the use of PIP as a catch-all, as a benefit outside of the cap, has been a disastrous failure and led to a system that can be gamed. I don't have a position on that because I don't know enough about it apart from anything else. I always believe people behave as they're incentivised and systems are used and worked out as time goes on. Not everyone who's used a Section 21 has used it at a time of no fault for the tenant, for example. Back to my soapbox of put pay up a lot, shed jobs in sectors. Here are the sectors that have lost the most jobs over the past 12 months. Accommodation and food service, 60,000, the poorest paid of all sectors as well. Information and communication, 41,286 jobs lost. Whether this is an AI argument here, because overall it's a well-paid sector, I don't know. Repairs of motor vehicles, down 26,593, the fourth poorest paid sector of the economy. And then manufacturing and construction have both lost 20,000 or slightly more, slightly less jobs, but both have shrunk as a sector in that time. So we can't blame minimum wage rises for all of that, of course. At least two of those sectors were in recession, localised recession. But what are the growing sectors that have balanced them out? Finance and insurance put on 21,000 jobs, the best paid sector. Arts, entertainment and recreation. I'm not sure if a year's data is much use here. Is it just a post-pandemic recovery after massive layoffs? But overall, it is a pretty poorly paid sector. Public administration and defence, social security, 45,494. Well paid, but then the expansion in defence, of course, has got to be something to answer for that. Education has put on nearly 90,000 jobs, which is about the average on pay scales. And then health and social workers put on around 155,000 jobs, paid just below education, right near the average. But you can see a pattern, I think. The largest shedding sector is the poorest payer. With 2 times 9% plus minimum wage increases on the spin, this can't be a fluke. Second, the growing sectors appear primarily government-funded jobs. Sure enough, 3 of the top 5 losers in terms of job numbers are first, second and fifth in the table of how much wages have grown. The top 3 most growing sectors are the 3 that have had the lowest pay increases in the past 12 months. This nuance around minimum wage will no doubt go undiscussed for the next 5 years, I'd imagine, but it does need to be recognised that this administration has done more for the lowest paid than anyone before them, with no political capital to gain from doing so. There's plenty for the Conservatives not to be proud of or even ashamed of from the past 14 years, but what they've done for low pay isn't one of those things. That's the base level, but if jobs disappear because business models stop stacking up at certain wage levels, the retraining and job creation of minimum wage jobs, if that's what you're replacing, needs to be strong, of course, and I'm not convinced that it is. Interestingly, the only age categories to go backwards in the past 12 months are the under 25s. And there's been a massive increase in over 65s on payrolls of over 70,000. Has the cost of living forced them back to work, perhaps? Or is retirement simply less affordable? Youth unemployment from a societal perspective is bad news, though, and can have significant costs. There we are, anyway, the deepest labour market deep dive for some time, with the overall conclusion that the objects in the rearview mirror don't look great, but the real-time information looks okay. Although remember, if supporting the red team, which would be interest rate cuts, then perversely bad economic news is good. I find it hard personally to support bad economic news because I want the nation to do okay. Well, I want it to do fantastically well, of course, but chance would be a fine thing. So on to the growth and another rearview mirror moment. April was a bad month for weather. Not that June has been great so far, but the April growth figure was zero. Zip, nada, which was where the economists thought it would be. A 3-month move from 0.6 to 0.7 because a negative January dropped out the figures, you'd think, but that wasn't the case, which still remains a mystery to me. And industrial and manufacturing had a bad April too. Construction output year on year was particularly weak. All of this, though, has been reversed according to the PMIs in what was a very healthy May, so there are limited causes for concern. Annual GDP growth rate now 0.6. Bearish forecasts for this year are only 0.5, and at this time it doesn't look like we'll see no growth before the end of this year. Inflation figures come on Wednesday next week and the consensus is 2%. And I have no strong conviction that we will overshoot, given that this April was such a poor month for consumption, apart from anything else. That helps growth quite significantly, certainly compared to the 2023 months with 10% inflation, because remember the growth figures are adjusted for inflation. This will help with the OBR forecasts when the next administration is in power, but their forecasts over the next 5 years are what matters, and we'll see exactly how Rachel Reeves manages the OBR and whether she uses the same skills that Jeremy Hunt developed very quickly. NISA, the National Institute of Economic and Social Research, sees Q2 GDP at 0.5% at the moment, which doesn't look unreasonable and is in line with forecasts I've made over the past couple of months. I expect May's growth print to be pretty healthy. In more granular detail, a 0.2% increase in the mighty services sector made up for production output down 0.9 and construction down 1.4. It's been a bad 12 months for construction, but outside of Resi, that currently once again appears to be in the rearview mirror. The last 4 months of services growth, 0.32, 0.21, 0.4, 0.19. That's 1.1% growth in 4 months. If production and construction start contributing positively, please tell me why we can't achieve 1.5% growth this year. I have quite literally no idea why the other forecasters are not saying the same. New work in construction is still 15% below the 2019 figure, and manufacturing has just about kept pace over the past 2.5 years. Inflation has taken its bite from those cherries just as it has from real property prices, and now looks finally as though there's progress in all sectors at the same time. Growth in April limp, growth May probably decent enough, June the jury is out as weather won't help some of the traditional summer activities. That's the summary, but of course people are pointing to things like the Euros, which make a massive difference to things like the hospitality industry, and lots of money being spent. So, RICS house price balance next. What did that miserable bunch say? Back to a pretty bearish print of -17 after a number of good prints over the past few months. From August 2023, with those bond yields up at 5% for the 5-year, the high in the cycle, we had come all the way back to -5 in March, -7 in April, and now -17 for May. Certainly doesn't agree with the Watkin analysis that I've been featuring more in the supplement over the past couple of months. So into the report. The bullets on the report for May. Demand for rentals continuing to rise alongside lack of supply. Shock horror. Near-term sales expectations still suggest recovery, but they're calling for policy support. And longer-term thinking is needed to fix current market issues. I'm not sure you can really get a headline out of that, but there you go. So not really much news. They describe affordability levels in the rental sector as plummeting. The tenant demand balance came from +10 to +35 in a return to significant demand levels, which is typical for the season, and then new landlord instructions were at least flat rather than declining. RICS also suggests that the impending drop in interest rates is making buyers wait. That's interesting. Perhaps those buyers should read the supplement and follow the gilt yields instead, since it's those that set their mortgages. Imagine the disappointment if, or when, the first 0.25% cut in base rates isn't matched on the 5-year money and everyone's left dumbfounded. +43 see a rise in sales activity over the coming year compared to +33 last month. but RICS are suggesting that prices fell in May. We'll wait and see how it turns out. The reality can be that cheaper houses are the only ones selling, but they're selling at higher prices, and so the notional national house price goes up. That's how RICS and Chris Watkin can both be correct. This is the danger of averages and aggregating figures, of course, that I talk about all the time. What we might be able to take away from this, though, is that there's some pent-up demand building up. If you're waiting for lower rates, does the first cut then make you rush out and buy, though? Do you change your mind when the base rate cut doesn't necessarily cut the gilt yield money? Do you look at everything closely enough to know that a 0.25% cut in the rates only saves 5 basis points on the gilt, for example? That's a made-up number, not a prediction, by the way. Or do you just keep calm and get on with it? I think most people are in the latter camp, to be honest. But an interest rate cut at base level cannot harm the market unless the bond markets thought it was a terrible idea, which I don't think they will. So talking of the bond markets, I was delighted to see after opening the week at 4.172 on the 5-year, we closed at 3.95. The big drops were when unemployment went up, that shaved off 5 basis points, and then US inflation looking under control. I'm sceptical, and I've got my stake in the ground there, but the figures were unexpectedly good. So perhaps the consumption in the world's greatest consumption machine is finally slowing down. That shaved off another 9 basis points very quickly, and yields then continued to trend downwards over the week. This looks a much more realistic price, although still at the higher side of my range. I was very surprised to read a Reuters piece this week, which suggested 40% of economists think the bank will cut in the meeting that's coming next week. It's unlikely because of the political side of things, although either decision, in a way, can be spun to prove their independence, but also unlikely because it isn't a full report meeting. These are only once every 3 months, so they'll be operating from last meeting's data as a rule, plus some mixed messages. Hot economy according to PMIs, a little bit disappointing on unemployment, and of course they'll have had this week's inflation figure that's coming to take into account by then. I still feel we're 90% likely to hold, 10% to cut, and I'm happy to go on the record to say the vote will be 6-3, hold to cut, with Hugh Pill, the chief economist, crossing the floor. You couldn't make a more detailed and therefore stupid prediction than that, so there you go. The 5-year gilt closed at 4.003 on the Thursday. What a tease of a price that is, with the SONIA swap preserving that 8 basis points or so discount at 3.937. 4 basis points cheaper than a month ago and 80 basis points cheaper than a year ago. Yay! These little reminders help us understand we've seen the worst of this cycle. So that's the macro rounded up, and that leaves a dive into the rear view mirror in the mortgage data. With no spoilers intended, I'm going to get on with it. Quarterly data is released about 2.5 months after the quarter is ended, so we've just had Q1 2024's data. The lending market will tell you 2023 was a recession for it as a rule. Larger lenders, big brokers, bad years. Plenty of smaller and more agile companies growing, of course, but that's typical, and that's where we got to. So the chief bullets chosen by the FCA. Total value of loans outstanding down 0.1% to 1.6549 trillion, 1.4% down on a year earlier. So people have paid down debt or not taken new debt as a rule. Gross mortgage advances, so mortgages completed, down 2.6 on last quarter to 51.6 billion. That's the lowest since Q2 2020, 12% lower than 2023 Q1, which would have been in the wake of Liz Truss, of course. It's a shame they even bothered to consider 2020 Q2 as part of the figures, because the pandemic paralysed the country and quite literally froze a whole number of businesses, especially those related to property. The value of new mortgage commitments, mortgages agreed, increased by 30.8% from the previous quarter to 60.1 billion, 31.2% up on a year ago. A year ago, agreeing new loans was tough in the wake of Liz, and last quarter, or Q4 2023 in this context, had some higher rates, and usually the last quarter of the year also displays suppressed activity, of course. But the devil as always hides in the detail. High loan-to-income ratios are down to their lowest level since Q1 2016. Owner-occupation purchases went down as a percentage compared to last quarter. Remortgages went up, so owner-occupier purchases about 55%. Remortgages moved up to take most of that gap. A little increase in buy-to-let share, moved to 8.3%, so £1 in every £12 being used for buy-to-let. Still 1.6% below a year ago, and well below the long-term average, and well below the share of all properties that are in the PRS, of course. So new arrears cases also decreased, so 11.4% of total outstanding balances with arrears are new. That's the lowest since Q3 22. Not out the woods yet, but the trend is in the right direction. Arrears balances is still up from the previous quarter and dramatically up on a year ago. That's suggesting that those struggling are holders of larger mortgages, which makes sense given everything else we know about the current situation. 1.28% of total loan balances are in arrears, 21.3 billion. 1.75% would be about where warning alarms would start to go off, sounding loudly at 2%. That was the Q1 2007 figure, which developed to go over 3.5% by Q1 2009, by which time, of course, it was too late to do anything about the problem. The average since the data started is 1.78, but the data only starts in Q1 07, and the financial crisis left a long scar. It isn't worrying in itself, but the trend needs to start to reduce, which I personally think it will when we get to Q2's figures in 3 months' time. When you get right into the granular detail in the spreadsheets underneath the analysis, the growth is in 5% plus arrears, which of course is the worrying one. Below 5% is actually shrinking. This is reflected in the lower percentage of arrears cases being new, which you would think may well be a leading indicator for an improving landscape, but there's a whole number of likely possession cases on the horizon. Of the total mortgage balances, how many are in 5% plus of arrears? 0.59%, or 1 in 170. That would assume all mortgages are equal, which they aren't, but it's okay as a stab. Those in 10% plus of arrears, 0.28% of all loan balances. That's as high a number as the data has seen since end 2010, early 11, when it reached 0.29. So again, you'd expect more possession cases on the back of that, although note just how long after the financial crisis that was. The possession stats for a comparison are still only 1/7 of what they were in Q1 2009, which again is useful context. So the calming in the new arrears cases level will have quelled many fears in the regulator, I'm sure, and is congruent with what we've seen and are seeing. People have battled through the cost of living crisis. When you get a rent increase or your mortgage drops off, you take a bit of a kicking, but for the rest, it's month on month steady improvement at the moment. On average, things are okay, but at the extremes, cases are bad and comparable to previous recessionary moments or economic crises. Anyway, I hope those deep dives into what's going on in the big bad world of macro and property at the moment help tie some things together. This, hopefully, will help to clarify, not serve to confuse. Here's my take for what it's worth, 10 points from the middle of June 2024. Firstly, prices are up, recovering, but they won't hit the land reg until the end of the year, although expect tick upwards from July's prints onwards at the ONS. There's a ton of stock out there. Be intelligent when you sell. Stage it. Do what needs to be done to stand out. Think and be better than the competition. There's still a ton of stock out there. Yes, I've said it twice. Use it as a negotiating weapon when you buy. Don't overpay right now. It would be crazy to do so. Base rate looks very close to starting to come down now. This won't affect mortgage rates massively, although our gilt yields have been too high, and they're 20 basis points down in the past week alone. There's another 0.5% or so that could come off before the end of the year. Nothing to write home about, nothing to freeze your activity for, but you can have confidence in the direction of travel. Number 5, stock in the PRS is still shrinking, and the scars of a fast increase in rates will leave a hole for years. It'll be years and years before this recovers. That window of opportunity is wider than it's been for some time. Number 6, you need to knuckle down and accept limited cash flow in the now, with a realistic plan of increasing cash flow over the coming years, with rents likely to move upwards. Number 7, HMO future looks bright if you are flitting between strategies. It's not how I do it or how I look at the world. I do deals. If it's a deal, I make it work regardless of the use class. Why so good for HMO though? Pay rises are concentrated at the lower end of the pay scales, and that's the HMO market for professionals as a rule. Just beware, those tenants are more likely to lose their jobs if wages continue this tear, although they are slowing slowly, and when the April rise drops out the figures, things should look more reasonable. The rental market will be left with survivors of a difficult period with a long tail here. Labour will need, if they can step away from some of their ideology, to be quite careful with the PRS, unless they want to shrink it even more before they work out that they won't be able to get all the social homes built that they want. The new government isn't going to change a lot, even though that's their word from their manifesto. The withdrawal of Section 21, when it does come, will look more like Scotland's existing policy of 7 years or so. And number 10, the rental market will continue to get worse for tenants before it gets better. Strong, fair, realistic solutions will continue to be needed for private tenants. So well done as always for getting to the end. Remember those last few early bird tickets for the next property business workshop on the 4th of July, bit.ly/PBW3. But there's only one real way to deal with all this continual noise and election claptrap, of course. Keep calm, always listen to the supplement and carry on. Thank you.